What is up, everybody? I'm Scott Melker, and this is the Wolf of All Streets podcast. Today's guest is a true OG in the crypto community and a self-proclaimed cheerleader for one of the most hyped projects in the space, Sovereign. Now, Edan Yago has created an extremely unique decentralized infrastructure powered by Bitcoin, which I can't wait to dig into. But beyond Sovereign, I'm eager to discuss how an OG Bitcoiner looks at what's fueling Bitcoin's price, Bitcoin's role in DeFi, current technological developments on Bitcoin, and how his intense background has led him to where he is today. So Yago, man, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here, man. Thanks.
So, Yago, we constantly hear about the narrative calling Bitcoin digital gold, but you have a crazy history with regards to actual gold. You were a gold smuggler as a child. I need to hear that story first just to get this started.
Yeah, so I grew up in South Africa during the apartheid, which was, the segregation between whites and everyone else. And my family were involved in fighting the apartheid government, and they were affiliated with the ANC, which is, Nelson Mandela. I remember my mother being nervous about us being followed, and it was mostly kept hush-hush. But one night I was woken up because there was like commotion, and my uncle was in our house, and there was like running around, and my grandfather was talking to him and gave him keys to my grandfather's car so that he could basically drive through the night to get out of South Africa, because he had discovered that the authorities were after him. So after that, we were trying to get out, and there were other members of the family who were getting out. And so there needed to be some way to get the family funds out of the country. So, like many countries today with oppressive governments, like Venezuela or Brazil, there were significant capital controls in South Africa. So what my mother did is she converted funds into Kruger rands, which were these South African gold coins, and sewed them into my clothes. And I started having trips overseas, like alone, which were basically smuggling trips because they wouldn't search kids. So that's how we got the funds out of the country. And by the time I came across Bitcoin, I think I was primed to realize its potential. And I basically, it screwed up my life. Like, I basically dropped everything else I was doing. And for the last almost 10 years, I've been engaged 100% in the space.
So can you talk about that first introduction to Bitcoin and why it was so powerful for you? Obviously, as you said, you were primed for it, but it's a big step to drop everything and, go full time into something at the time that was especially so nascent and small.
Yeah. So I think I've inherited the whatever gene it is that is in my family that makes us difficult people when it comes to dealing with authorities. I've always been sort of politically engaged and active, but also from an academic perspective, I was studying neuroscience, and specifically I'd been focusing on neural networks. Given sort of my background from the perspective of thinking about what happens when governments go wrong, thinking about how important monetary sovereignty was for personal freedom. I don't think that a person can be free if they don't have freedom over their assets. And also because I was just, intellectually fascinated and curious with my optimistic view of a future where we would use less resources, we would be less wasteful because we would mostly be using digital resources. We would live in more and more digital worlds as we spent more and more time in the internet, as the internet became more and more immersive. I just felt it was the future in it touched every single nerve. And it was clear to me that as big as the internet was, the biggest thing it was missing was a homegrown economy, a way of having a proper economy. And a proper economy means native scarcity. And Bitcoin invented that. Bitcoin is a revolution of freedom, but it's dressed up as a get-rich-quick scheme. And that's what makes it so successful.
Yeah, that's true. You need the speculation for those who believe in it to actually profit and see it come to fruition in the end. And I think that's something that we're seeing. One of the big hot topic issues of the last year in crypto obviously has been DeFi, right? We've seen all these platforms built largely on Ethereum, insane gains and losses by people speculating on food coins and yield farming and all of this stuff. I know that it's your contention that the real base of DeFi should and can be Bitcoin. So I'd like to dig into that because I think most people's view at the moment is that it's an Ethereum based concept.
The way I think about it is you have like the first invention, which is Bitcoin, which is the base invention. And that's monetary sovereignty. It's a new monetary system. Phase two is the financial system, right? So we need to build the decentralized, permissionless, borderless financial system. And up until we had DeFi, we didn't really have that. The ecosystem around the decentralized monetary system was completely centralized, right? Centralized exchanges, centralized lending services, etc., in financial institutions. But now with DeFi, we're starting to bring the decentralization into phase two, which is the finance world. And once we get the finance world, which is where the liquidity is, which is where the ability to generate the capital to start new businesses is, then you get to the end game, which is a decentralized, permissionless, borderless economic system, which means that every single person will be living their lives, all of their economic activity basically in the crypto space. And I think that's where we're going, and I think that's the end game. And each of these phases, I think, could take about 10 years. The problem with DeFi right now, as I see it, is that the biggest, most important pool of liquidity, 90% of the liquidity in the crypto space is in Bitcoin. And it's mostly unconnected to the DeFi space. So we need to marry those two pieces if we really want them to blossom and be as powerful, as effective as they should be.
And that's a perfect segue into Sovereign, right? I mean, that's what you guys are doing. So I'd love for you to talk about the platform and how you're making that happen.
So what Sovereign is, I think maybe one way to think about Sovereign is a side chain to Bitcoin, which means that it is Bitcoin native. It has Bitcoin as its native currency. And at the same time, it's deeply connected to, and we'll get more and more deeply connected to Ethereum. So it's on the one hand a sidechain to Bitcoin, on the other hand it's like the Bitcoin shard for Ethereum. And the goal exactly is to provide the glue between those two worlds. And this is because on the one hand, on the ideological side, right, I believe that if people are going to be free, then we need to have a financial world which is as decentralized as our monetary base in Bitcoin. And then sort of on the greed side, and the reason I think this will work is, when I was a student, I had a finance professor. And in the very first class, the finance professor said, the way you build a successful financial system or a successful financial business is you basically need to just do one thing. You find a giant stream of money and you go stand in the middle of it. And I think the giant stream, right, which we as an industry need, is the deep liquidity of Bitcoin with the decentralized financial tools of the DeFi space.
So it sounds like for you, the end all be all is Bitcoin. And so you can take the example of what's being built in other places and improve upon it and put it on Bitcoin and make it better.
Well, I don't think it's the end all. I really love what's being built on Ethereum. I think that Ethereum in isolation of Bitcoin, it loses a lot of its power, and Bitcoin in isolation to Ethereum loses a lot of its power. The real locus of gravity, the real network effects are in the assets. And the two big assets that have network effects right now in terms of liquidity pooling is, on the one hand, Bitcoin as the reserve asset, and on the other hand, stablecoins as the bridging asset to the rest of the fiat world.
It's interesting that you bring up stablecoins because obviously, you were inspired by the white paper, which is a peer-to-peer cash. Right.
Yeah.
And to some degree, I mean, I've made the argument before and heard many others make it. We've seen Bitcoin sort of polarized towards the store of value narrative because stablecoins have come in and are actually to some, the superior cash. Do you think that stablecoins to some degree are far more transactable and have replaced that part of what Bitcoin was intended for?
In the short term, certainly. I always thought that it would be very difficult for people to transition sort of their economic lives directly to Bitcoin. And, going back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, I think the decentralized borderless economic phase is the end game. It's the last thing that we will do. And so we need something to bridge us there. I tend to think of it, certainly in terms of Bitcoin, as more like real estate, right? Nobody day trades real estate, but if you were growing up in the 60s or the 70s or even the 80s, you only really had to make one right decision, and that was to buy a house. Our generation doesn't have that. We can't even afford to buy houses. But our generation, the one right decision you need to do is to buy Bitcoin and hold. You do that, that's the equivalent of buying a house in the 70s or the 80s.
Do you think that decision is still available to most regardless of the price? There's obviously some who would argue that was true at 1,000 or 100 or 3,000, but 30,000, 40,000. Do you think that people need to be concerned about tops, or do you think that if you have the long enough time horizon, this is merely a step on the way?
Nobody who bought a house in 1973 remembers whether it was a good year for real estate or a bad year for real estate. They know that they bought the house for $30,000. Today, that house is worth $1 million. With Bitcoin, the same thing is going to happen, except much, much faster. We have an opportunity. Our generation has been given an opportunity. We got lucky that we get to be part of the greatest opportunity for wealth creation that humankind has ever experienced. And anyone can do whatever they want, but I'm going to take full advantage of it.
I agree with you. I just completely playing devil's advocate, but I think that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg here, obviously. And 2020 to some degree is what opened the floodgates to that, right? And the problems that the world is becoming aware of that maybe some of us were aware of before 2020 are just coming into focus for your average person, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, monetary policy, fiscal policy, central banks, endless printing, all of these things. You knew about them before, but your average person is still just having that awakening, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, I'm extremely optimistic about the future because we are going through such a transitional phase. I think it's clear to everyone and that our institutions are no longer performing the function that they were meant to perform. We no longer trust them. They are no longer fit for purpose. National institutions can no longer deal with a globalized world. Slow institutions can no longer deal with a fast world. Paper-based institutions can no longer deal with a digital world. In every single way, they are no longer fit for purpose. And as a result, most people have become very, very angry or depressed because they see the world that they know crumbling around them. I think we are at the precipice of change, but what's going to happen is once we're pushed over that precipice, it's not that we're going to fall, it's that we're going to fly. Everything that all of the stuff has been holding us back. The academia and how old and inefficient has been holding back science. Politics has been holding back social change. The mega corporations of yesterday have been holding back economic change. And we're about to change all of that and unleash human potential again.
Man, when you say it, it sounds so inspiring. I'm ready. You got me pumped up.